Hey everybody, this is my 20 long open topped office tank, and I just finished doing a water and filter change, so I had a few things that I wanted to discuss with this tank. One of them being whether or not I should add a German blue ram or a GBR. I've always wanted one, and indeed early on in my fish keeping hobby years ago, I tried to keep them, and I never had any luck. There were two schools of thought as to why I wasn't having any luck, and it could be a combination of both of these factors. One was that I was buying these GBRs from a big chain pet store, and it's often said that they come from terrible conditions and their genetics are horrible. And there's a lot of people out there that think if you get GBRs from these big chain pet stores, you're just destined for failure because they're terrible fish and they never survive, and so on and so forth. I can possibly see that being true to some extent, considering when you look at the price of them in the big chain pet stores compared to the price of them when you see them at a good, high quality fish store. Um, there's got to be some difference in the breeders that they're getting them from or something like that. But the other factor that has always been considered a reason that my GBRs were never successful is I never kept them in particularly warm tanks. I always kept them in tanks that had other fish that were in either room temperature conditions or upper 70s, as most of my tanks usually sit. And the GBRs apparently need somewhere more approaching the mid 80s to be a good, healthy, happy fish. Now, for me personally, I know that I'm not the greatest at paying attention to detail and staying on top of things, and my fear is that if I get a fish like a GBR that does require special attention, and in this case it's simply keeping the tank a little warmer than the room, but that is some special condition that needs to be met. And if I bump the plug, or my cat knocks it loose, or the heater fails, hopefully in the off position. I have been discussing that recently, the difference between a heater failing off versus a heater failing on. Big difference there. But if the heater fails off and the tank starts cooling down and comes down to room temperature, I'm afraid that my first time I would notice that would be when the GBR started becoming listless and losing weight and not eating and, showing signs of distress because it was being kept in water that was too cold for it. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. That is still part of my personality. That hasn't changed. But with these new digital heaters I have in the tank, you can see they've got a display on them. So every time I walk in the room, I just glance over to see what the tank is doing. And that also gives me an idea of what the room temperature is doing. If it feels really warm in here, I'll look over there and see if the tank seems a little warmer than normal. I have it set at 26, and yet it still warms up to 27. Now, I'll grant you, when I did the water change, I didn't pay much attention to the water. I just grabbed it out of the faucet in the tub, and it might have been a degree or two warmer than what was already in there. I don't know. Didn't pay that much attention to it. It doesn't really matter if you shift the water temperature a degree or two. So it should come back down to 26. That's usually where it sits, but it does fluctuate. It does get a little warmer than that. And I believe we adjusted the AC yesterday because we had the windows open. It was a nice day and that sort of thing. And as a result, the room is a little warmer, and now the tank is a little warmer. So these tiny little fluctuations in temperature really do impact the tank, but they're still not going to make a tank 85 degrees, which is what I would really need it to be in order to keep a GBR in there. And I'm just afraid that that's going to be an issue for me. So I don't know, but I did go down the pet store yesterday. I was actually down that way for work, and I swung past the good pet store, the House of Tropicals down in Glen Burnie. And I looked around a little bit. I was hoping to talk to Mike, but of course it was his day off. Mike being the owner, he's actually supposed to be looking out for some rainbow fish for me at the moment. And when I was in there and he wasn't, I decided to just give a quick walk through the store just because. And I walked down my favorite aisle that's always got all the angelfish in it. And I saw some GBRs in there that were absolutely gorgeous. They looked plump and healthy and colorful, and they were $20 a piece. And I thought about the GBRs I see at PetSmart that are $5 a piece or $6 a piece or whatever they are. And I thought, okay, well, I can see the price difference just by looking at them. So it kind of got me to thinking, maybe spending a little bit of money and getting a GBR that is healthy and comes from a good environment, if I keep the tank warm enough, I think I might be ready to give it another shot after all these years, because I've always wanted to have a GBR in one of my tanks. I think they're absolutely beautiful little fish, and if their personality is anything like the Bolivian rams, which I also love, then they're a real winner. It's just the color on the GBRs is just stunning, and you don't get that on the Bolivians. So I'm hoping that if I do make the plunge, everything will be fine. I also saw some angelfish while I was down there. I got a little bit of video. It's not very good. It is mostly just reflection of me, but you do get to see two really gorgeous angelfish. The blue marble is the one I really have my eye on. So let me cut to that for a moment. Okay, now that was just a little aside. I'm not planning on buying any new angelfish or anything like that, but those were in the tank right next to the GBRs, and I just shot that video because it was just an amazing looking angelfish. So maybe someday I'll have an angelfish like that, but not today. We are still thinking about the GBRs though. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in this tank when I did my water change was my filter. My filter was running really slow again. The water level had dropped down considerably. We were all the way down to about here by the time I got around to the water change. And the water was just sort of dribbling out of there and dripping down into the water. It wasn't really flowing in the way it is now. It wasn't creating any kind of disturbance in the water. There was no circulation going on at all. And the reason being was partially because the filter was starting to get clogged up, but mostly because the intake tube right here, right there, was getting clogged up with that white water mold again. Now, white water mold is actually a fungus, but it grows on plastic, and it grows on ABS plastic especially, which is what this clear sort of acrylic-y like plastic that a lot of our filter parts are made out of. So I took it apart, I scrubbed it out, I cleaned it, and I even went outside and shot a little video segment trying to give you a look at it so you could see what white water mold looks like. But unfortunately I did that after I had cleaned it out, so we don't get a terribly good look at it. But nonetheless, let's have a look outside and see what the white water mold actually looks like. Alright, so this is the white water mold. I brought it out here so we could see it in the bright sunshine. But that is what's left of it. I've been scrubbing it out. I used a bottle brush to clean as much of the tubing as I could. I'm sure there's still some in there somewhere. And then of course this side I likewise stuck the bottle brush up through this end, but there's only so much you can do to get it out. I wish I'd actually gotten some video of this before I cleaned it so I could have shown you a better look at what that actually looks like inside the plastic. But white water mold is something that is very different than the normal scum that just sort of builds up in there. And occasionally you do have to pull these out and clean them, and you'll get gunk that builds up in there, and that's perfectly normal. This stuff is different. This is the white water mold, and it is actually a type of fungus. I don't know why it's called white water mold. People will frequently get it in their pools. Looks like we're getting a visit from Bootsy. Coming home, I wonder where he's been. So again, I just wanted to get a look at that to help identify it. If you've got some stuff growing on the plastic in one of your aquariums, then this is very well what it could be. It's sort of a clearish type growth, and if it gets thick enough and you get enough of it, it will actually sort of start to develop in sheets. And while it won't attach to your glass or anything, you could actually get sort of ghost-like sheets of this stuff floating around in your aquarium, or maybe floating across the surface of your aquarium if it gets bad. I did have one tank that I was using as a grow-out tank to grow out some plants that wound up getting a bunch of this white water mold growing again in the filter. The filter I had in that tank was all plastic, and it wound up getting so much of it in there that I literally had sheets of that white stuff floating around inside the aquarium, and it was nasty and messy. And I honestly don't even know what wound up clearing it up, so it just went away. Anyway, let's get back to the tank, and I'll finish my discussion on what happened during the water change. Alright, so you can see I got it pretty well cleaned out. And there is still some in there, but it's probably going to come back because I didn't get it completely cleaned out. But as I said, it doesn't grow on glass or plants or rockwork. It grows on plastic. It's a very specific type of fungus that grows on plastic. So as long as it's just growing inside that tube, I'm not going to worry too much about it. It's just an added little part of my tank maintenance. Every couple of water changes, I have to get in there and sort of rinse that tube out and get that white water mold out of there. And then the tank goes right back to looking just like this, and the water flows nice and freely again, and it's not that big of an issue. Now, I had mentioned that I did have the white water mold in a tank in the basement that I use as a grow-out tank. And I don't know why it went away in that tank, but eventually it just went away. I kept doing the water changes, which I don't really ever do on my grow-out tanks for plants, but in this case I was trying to get rid of that white water mold. And I'd done everything to it. I drained the tank and refilled it. I had wiped it clean. I had treated it with hydrogen peroxide. I'd treated it with isopropyl alcohol, and nothing seemed to get rid of it. And then I stopped messing around with it, and eventually it just sort of went away. And I don't have that problem in any of my tanks anymore, except for recently I've noticed that I'm starting to get it in this filter again. So I'm not going to worry too much about it, and it'll probably just go away in its own right. But when I do a water change, I will get in there and rinse it out, clean it out, make sure I've got good vigorous water flow with the aquarium positioned this way, and having the filter on the long end. You know, it's a challenge to get all of that stuff down here swirled around all the way back to this end so it gets picked up by the filter. So when I do a water change in this tank, I usually try to get the gravel vac down into this end of the tank a little bit if I can, and that helps to pull some of that stuff out. But having good water flow and good water circulation in there is really important for a tank like this anyway. So there you go. Just wanted to have a little discussion about this tank. Seems like there's a lot going on in there, even though there's really not. I'm just thinking about getting a new fish, and I got some white water mold growing in the filter there, but I can make a 10-minute video out of just about anything. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't want to miss anything I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And then, of course, don't forget this one is my 20-gallon open-topped office tank. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.